Oil-rich countries in the Arab world must do more to help their poor neighbors, a United Nations report has recommended. But why should they? And what exactly can they do to help? What are the risks for the Gulf states? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Huda Abdelhamid. Rich Gulf nations are not doing enough to help their poorer Arab neighbors. That's one of the conclusions that could be drawn from the latest UN report on human development in the Arab world. It says about 40% of the Arab population lives in poverty, and that number is set to rise with the high rate of population growth in the region. Bethan Howe reports.
Arab countries are home to around 320 million people. The UN estimates that'll increase to a whopping 395 million by just 2015. The 2009 UN Arab Human Development Report looks into all areas of human security and uncovers some startling differences in poverty levels across the region. The report states that trends in unemployment coupled with population growth rates indicate that Arab countries will need about 51 million new jobs by 2020. That's to stop the current unemployment rate from growing. How this will be achieved is not suggested, but the disparity between rich and poor is clear. Youth unemployment stands at 46% in Algeria, whereas in the UAE it's just 6.3%. The report also tackles hunger and says the region as a whole is falling behind in achieving the hunger reduction target of the Millennium Development Goals. These goals include halving both the proportion of people living on less than $1 a day and the proportion of people suffering from hunger. The report says the countries that have made the greatest progress towards lowering the prevalence of undernourishment are Djibouti, Kuwait and Mauritania. But Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Morocco and Yemen recorded increases in undernourishment. The report also looks into the effects of occupation and military intervention in Arab countries. It concludes that not only do people living under occupation and in war zones suffer, but that such activity undercuts human security in other Arab and neighbouring countries. This can be seen in refugee numbers. The UN has registered 7.5 million refugees in the region, but it's estimated the actual figure is several million higher. The report doesn't set out to solve these issues, but it does suggest that the richer countries are dealing less with their neighbours, and that has its own ramifications. It ends by declaring that note should be taken of issues covering the environment, human rights, health and economic concerns. Though how any of the imbalances will be redressed as a result of the report remains unanswered. Bethan Howe, Inside Story.
Well, joining me to discuss this on the show today, from Cairo, Ahmed Mustafa, a project manager at the UNDP's Arab Trade and Development Programme and a member of the team that wrote this report. In Sana'a, Mahmoud Al-Iriani, an associate professor of economics at Sana'a University, and from Riyadh, Talal Tukan, an asset management specialist at Thomson Reuters. Talal Tukan, let me start with you. Do you think that rich countries, so mainly the Gulf states, have an obligation to help poor Arab countries?
Yeah, thank you very much, Huda. First of all, I would like to say that it's a bright idea to have some kind of solidarity in terms of supporting other areas, but the richest areas as well. This is theoretically applicable, but when it comes to reality, and if we see a clear-cut example what happened during this crisis, is that yet the rich countries are still under the exposure, or in other words, the risk of volatile oil prices, as most of the budgets and the GDPs are yet composed of revenues generated from that oil, exports, which almost represent 70 to 80% of their budgets. This is one side. And stating it as an obligation would be kind of difficult, especially when resorting back to the politics, which shows that they cannot assure in the meantime that those funds are being properly invested and transferred to certain governments, either in Africa or in the Arab world in general. So as an idea, in general, it's theoretically bright, but when it comes to practicality, we can find some difficulties coming across the way. And in the meantime, I can see that if it can just only be put in a different shape. So the idea is applicable in terms of theory, but when it comes to apply it or put it in the right shape, I guess that this idea has not been yet matured, and most of the countries here, especially when it comes to the GCC members, they thought about it several times before. And actually, when it comes to the unemployment, for example, the GCC contained and curbed big part of the unemployment rate during the last decade and the one before as well, when they hired and they invested lots of money on the infrastructure. They hired a lot of people, especially from countries just like Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and other countries just like Egypt and Morocco. So in general, the obligation, the commitment also should take a shape that can be empirically and practically studied. But in general, this step needs to be elaborated and well studied in order to make sure that a structural change comes along, not just only pouring a lot of funds in one side and not make sure don't make sure that this happens. And we saw that during the last year when the UAE, especially Dubai, fell in a crisis due to the fact that they invested a lot of money, maybe not in helping other countries, but the idea is still there that the rich countries are still also under big risk, which is the volatility of the oil prices, and an obligation right away to help without structural change would be difficult.
Well, Ahmed Mustafa, I mean, the UN report, one of the UN report's main recommendation is really for the Gulf states to help the poorer countries. But this comes just at a time where the Gulf states have also proven that their economies are not so solid.
Absolutely. Precisely for this reason, we put forward such recommendation. And it's slightly misquoted from the report to say that it's a call for richer countries to help poor countries. It's more of a call for a business model that has been tested successfully in other regions. And we all recall the Japanese investments several decades ago in Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Korea is playing that role in more recently. European investments in Eastern Europe. So the business model has been tested before, and precisely for the vulnerability and the risks that come with less diversified economies, reliance on volatile oil prices, and the nature of the portfolio of their investments abroad. That's why all the stylized facts lead to this conclusion that more investment within the region will be actually more beneficial for the region as a whole and for richer countries. The region is very diversified in terms of resources, from natural resources to labor, skills of labor, even climate. And that makes more sense for investment to actually follow a business model that utilizes the comparative advantage that countries possess.
Mahmoud Al-Iriani, Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the region. Nearly 60% of its people live under the poverty line. Money pumped in from the Gulf, is that a way that could help lift Yemen's economy, but on a durable way?
First, thank you for having me in your program. Actually, Yemen, yes, Yemen is one of the poorest country, or the poorest country in the Arab world. However, I don't want you to define me as trying to defend the interest of Yemen. What I would say is that giving aid from rich countries to poor countries in the Arab world is not an obligation on the rich countries. It's actually, to the contrary, in their best interest. My colleague, I think in Riyadh, Mr. Talal, mentioned that the Gulf states, or the rich states in general, have been going through some economic hardships because of the international crisis. However, if we look at the size, the volume of aid required to help a poor country like Yemen, I don't think that this is going to be a big burden on the rich countries, because Yemen maybe needs something near $5 to $10 billion, which is maybe just a small percentage of what the Gulf states have lost in the crisis. The issue here is not money. Yemen is a neighbor of the rich states, and it has been deprived from the labor market of these states, except for Saudi Arabia, which now and then closes its borders in the face of Yemeni workers. I think poor countries in the Arab world do not need financial aid per se. They need somebody to help them help themselves. We can say that the traditional view of economic growth and prosperity, which looks at foreign aid as a prescription for more savings, more investment, and then economic growth and higher income, has been challenged, because in order for this financial aid to work, to be helpful, to be useful, it has to have some conditions there. First of all, the traditional view thinks or says that the conditions for giving aid from the rich to the poor countries do not have anything attached to it, like the self-interest of the donor countries. The second is that it assumes that if you give poor countries more money, then in this case they will be able to use it, they will be able to channel that money to the poor. When in fact, if I give an example, Yemen as an example, Yemen has been receiving a big amount of aid from many countries. It is one of the biggest recipient of foreign aid, maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest. However, that money is not actually helping much in developing the country.
Let me just bring in here,
the problem with
just Mr.
Yes.
Ahmed Mustafa, when you say that Gulf states should help more the poorer countries, or why should they, if it's so difficult, as Mr. Al-Iriani just said, for that money to be invested, in the sense that we don't know where it goes, there's problems of lack of transparency, there's problems of corruption, so why would they put any kind of money into those countries?
Well, the issue of corruption and the issue of economic governance, will always be there. And we need to actually look at the package of policy recommendations that the report put forward, some of which deals with the issue of corruptions and the issues of social contract, the issue of economic governance in the broader sense. And when we deal with those issues and then we create an environment that makes it more productive and beneficial for the countries that receiving the aid, as well as the countries that are where the aids are originated, as well as investment, and then you can expect some change. And of course, if you deal with only one side of the problem and ignore the rest of the challenges that are put forward by the report, then of course you will not get the expected results, or will not be as successful.
Talal Tukan, isn't it quite ironic, really, that the Arab League as a regional organization precedes the EU, but yet it's been nearly 60 years now, and the region hasn't been able to form a model of economic integration, of bilateral trade that helps make this region, this oil-rich region, really an economic power hold?
First of all, I would like to say that I agree with both Muhammad and Ahmed in terms of what Ahmed said in terms of diversification, that in case and only if the integrated took place, or at least started, that most of the countries have something in their pockets to offer and to diversify, whether in terms of just like agriculture, any sector or segment in the economy. Each country has a forte, but as an integration, here where the politics play a crucial role, and the interior problems that lots of countries, of course, without mentioning any, but most of them suffer from. So let's say that the rich countries are willing to invest there, but two issues arise in that respect, which is, first of all, the expropriation risk, which is when they invest in those countries, they wouldn't be able to make sure that the capital is preserved, or at least even if it's a subsidy, they wouldn't be able to assure that it's directed to the right places. This is one side of the truth. And if we look on the other side, we will find out that also, even if it comes to in terms of currency, there is a big risk, especially when it comes to poor countries, and if the transfers will be in form of investments. In the other way around, I also agree with what Mahmoud said, which is we cannot invest. It's not a one-off subsidy that will help the countries only reach the subsistence level. If it comes to that, of course they have to stand by each other. But what we're talking about here is a general shift in economies, trying to reshape our economies in a way that improve the living standards. And we saw that empirically that it didn't work for a long period of time, for decades. So as I mentioned, I would like to reiterate, which is that the GCC really helped a lot of countries curb the unemployment rate, which is the most important thing. If we look at it and scrutinize into structural issues, we will find out that the problem is not the unemployment rate itself. It's actually in the workforce percentage out of the population, which is too low, and it contributes too little to the world workforce, which is, of course, ascribed to structural problems and not to the need of money only. If we just also look at the GCC in general, we will find out that it's a resource-based economies and not knowledge-based. And they're working now, and they have actually traversed wide strides in terms of changing the economies to depend on more sources than the oil, just like tourism, investments, and real estate. But yet we still have long distance to traverse in order to reach the point at which we can help other countries structure a new economy.
Okay, Mahmoud Al-Iriani, I see you nodding in agreement. Yes. So is it a matter that actually the poor countries must do more to help themselves first?
Yes, I think that is the right statement to say. I would like to distinguish between long-term and short-term goals. For the Gulf states and the rich Arab countries in general, I think helping the poor countries, especially those who are in turmoil like Yemen, is in their best interest in the short run to keep their security, or to defend their security. However, that providing just financial resources or money is not enough. For a country like Yemen, which has above 23 million people who are most of them are unemployed, I think the best help that can come from the Gulf states is to allow Yemenis to go and work in the Gulf. Now, in terms of the usefulness of help or aid, I think if you look at a country like Yemen, you see that in the past, where the Gulf markets, work markets were open to Yemenis, remittances have contributed to the development of the country much more than foreign aid, even though if you look at the numbers, you can see that foreign aid in terms of size have been much more than the remittances from workers. So the private sector is more efficient in receiving, if you wish, aid in terms of money coming from work than foreign aid that comes from government to government. Now, in general, I think, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just because we're running out of time, I just want to put your remarks to Ahmed Mustafa.
Okay.
Ahmed Mustafa, don't you think really that the core of the problem here is that for many decades, really, Arab governments have ignored human development, and maybe that should be the priority at this moment in time?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I do agree. We cannot expect more investments or more foreign aid to solve all the challenges that are put forward by the report, and this is not what the report, of course, set out to say. However, it's part of a large policy package, and you're absolutely right. Ignoring human development for decades have put Arab countries in the situation where they are right now. As my colleague in Doha mentioned, that being based on oil as the main resource rather than not being knowledge-based, that resulted in the risk exposure and the nature of their portfolio investment that actually proved not to be less riskier in Europe or in the States than being in Arab countries, is where that led us to the situation where we are right now. The challenges are actually difficult. They're rather difficult. And this is also one of the reasons the report strongly emphasized the fact that since the challenges are so diversified and they are so difficult, regional solutions are more likely to succeed than national level solutions.
And talking about regional solutions,
and this was the main message that we put forward.
The Gulf countries need also to prepare for the post-oil era, really, and need to develop a post-oil economy. Now, they don't have the manpower. Isn't maybe money and manpower a good way to sort of develop economic interactions between the rich countries and the poor countries?
Yes, of course. As I just only mentioned before, is that the problem comes in the workforce percentage out of the population, which means that, as we know, the labor force is the spending power, which at the end of the day translates into GDP. And the other way around, the output also is determined by the manpower. And what happens is that the poverty comes out due to the imported inflation, which makes it hard and difficult for people in the GCC or the countries around to buy or to spend a lot, so they barely can be able to reach into subsistence level. So that means that directing the economies into knowledge base by investing more in the human resources and the manpower, but this also comes when going backwards and look into the education system, for example, and trying to build more on soft skills, on occupational and technical skills when it comes to preparing the staff or the manpower to go into the markets. That we can see that clearly and practically proven in the GCC, as lots of Western staff and employees that just only take place here, and the reason is that we have some sort of either structural or lack of skills, though we have lots of people are getting into the education system and graduate from there, but they are not yet ready and armed to face the practical life. So yeah, of course, you have to invest. You need the money to invest in the people, but you need the willingness of the people and connecting the education system in the Arab world into the practical life and the business itself. And
I'm afraid this is all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Talal Tukan in Riyadh, Ahmed Mustafa in Cairo, and Mahmoud Al-Iriani in Sana'a. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.